everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jenn Messina, and I'm a registered dietitian, and I specialize in working with families and kids. Today, we're going to be talking about strategies to help with your picky eater at home and to reduce the mealtime battles. So the first suggestion I would have is really to make sure that kids are coming to the table hungry. This is commonly what I see is that kids are snacking a lot right before mealtimes. And then when it comes to mealtimes, they're not super hungry, they're not super motivated, and there is more of a battle wanting to get up and down from the table. So generally, younger kids, we want to be feeding them about every 2 to 3 hours and giving them enough time in between so that they're hungry but not famished. The other thing to note is that even if they're asking for something to drink, I would suggest water in between meals. And that's because things like milk or juice can also interfere with their appetite, and they're not going to be that hungry when they get to the table. The next thing is that kids really like to choose. As they're developing their independence and they're learning about what it means to be their own little person, what I find is that giving them the opportunity to choose in any way is actually going to help them feel more in control of the situation. So that could start at the grocery store, bringing them with you, asking them to help choose some of the items that are on your list, or getting them their own little checklist to find, and then putting foods family style in the middle of the table. And that lets kids decide, of the foods provided, which foods are they going to choose that they would like to have. So in general, I would recommend parents provide and kids decide. So say they only want to have the pasta and the broccoli, and they don't want the chicken that night. In general, we don't want to try and force or pressure kids to eat, because actually those foods then become more they'll become like foods that they don't want, because they're going to feel like those foods are forced on them, so they're so bad that they need to be forced to eat them. So let them decide as much as possible what they put on their plate, what portions. If they're very little, you can help them. But when we serve family style, that actually helps give them a bit of a choice. Whenever we can get kids involved, again, you're going to have better buy-in. So when I ask families to get kids involved, this is to touch, to smell, to taste, possibly during the preparation process, but also getting them in the kitchen helps them be more familiar with those foods before they actually have the expectation to eat them. So getting more familiar helps them feel more comfortable with these foods, and then they may possibly put them on their plate. But we do know that it can take up to, say, 15 to 25 food exposures before a child may actually eat that food. So keep getting them in the kitchen, keep getting them to touch. And, we did a salad spinner the other day, and that was a great hit. And then my son wanted to feed some of his lettuce to his animals, and then he actually ended up eating a bit of lettuce later. So letting them have that no pressure involvement might actually help their resistance to eating those foods later. So here's an example which you can, take a screenshot of, or you can save. But basically, when we're looking at different age-appropriate tasks, different ages can actually do different things. So even from the youngest age, we can get them involved to do different things. So all the way up to, 10 years old plus, they can be much more independent, and we want to help kids have that relationship with food that they can start doing a little bit for themselves. My other kind of top tip would be to try really hard to eat together. Now, I know families are busy. I have a family too. I know how hard it is to get everybody at the table at the same time. But really, we want to have this opportunity as a time to connect as a family, and for parents or caregivers to provide this healthy modeling eating these foods. So even if your child isn't eating, say, broccoli right now, they're watching you eat the broccoli. And so when you're eating the broccoli, they're being curious and noticing and seeing what's going on. So the more we can model, the better our kids' food acceptance will be. If you aren't doing this already, or if kids are always using the iPad, there's a couple different strategies I would use here. If your child is always using an iPad at the table, we can start with trying 1 meal per day with no iPad. So whether that's like dinner time or lunch, whichever the meal is you decide, you can take the iPad away. We call it cold turkey, or you can reduce the number of minutes. For example, if they always get one show while they eat, we can reduce it so they only get 5 minutes in the beginning, and then we reduce to 4 minutes, 3 minutes. So that would be my suggestion if you're trying to move towards more screen free. we do want to aim for screen-free meals because we want kids to note their own internal hunger and fullness cues. So, work on that, weaning them off the screen as much as possible, and then trying to figure out what meal is going to work for you as a family that you can actually eat together. It might not necessarily be dinner. If families are, working late or there's after school activities, sometimes we do breakfast, and sometimes it's on the weekends we plan for like that brunch or whatnot. So thinking about it as a family, what is the one meal we can eat together, and then trying to build on that, starting from one meal a week and then working up to maybe one meal a day. The last thing I want to try and suggest here is trying to provide unfamiliar foods with familiar foods. So if foods are new or different, they're very challenging for kids to accept right away. I often think of, I use the example, imagine I'm offering you something from a foreign restaurant that you don't understand the menu, you don't know what it is, you don't know if it's an animal or a vegetable. It's a little scary, right? So, as much as possible, we want to be talking to kids using adjectives to describe this is crispy, this is smooth, this is sweet, this is salty, comparing it to other foods that we already eat. Like this is a little bit salty, like the pickles that you had yesterday. It's a bit crunchy, like that same texture. So we can use those descriptive words, but we also want to do it in a no pressure way and offering what we call safe foods or familiar foods at the same time. So having some options so we know that if all else fails, at least they can eat that bit of bread, a little bit of milk, and that fruit, and they can have something at the meal, because we really want the meal environment to be a pleasant experience. So these would be my top tips around helping your kids have that decreased picky eating. So I just wanted to thank you so much for spending your time here with us today. And please let me know if you have any questions or reach out through Instagram or through my website. Have a great day.